Hi everybody, and welcome back to Cardiac Reader for Teens. For those of you who don't know, Cardiac Reader for Teens is a place where teens can come together with other teens to learn about Spiritist teachings and topics in a way that makes more sense to us and is more relatable to us as teenagers in today's society. For the past few weeks now, we've been reading through the conclusion part of the Spirits book, which kind of sums up the main things that we've hit on and a kind of more of an explanation of why Spiritism, why it is believed in. What are these aspects that can prove to us that this is true, right? And of course, it's not forcing us to believe any of this, but for us to come to our own terms, and if we agree with it, then they're like saying like, yeah, these are the reasons why lots of people agree on it. And we've talked about how it's based on real things that follow the laws of nature, etc. And as we know, we've read through all the Spirits book to this point. But as we know, that's not the end. We don't just read this book once, but you have to read it over and over again to get a better understanding of everything of all the questions and all the topics and all the concerns that we might have, because just reading it one time through, we're not going to understand anything. Just reading it 5 times through, you're not going to understand everything. So you need to keep reading it, and every time we'll learn something new. So just because we read it one time, now we have a good basis, right, to keep growing off of that and to learn more on top of that. But we must remember that we haven't learned everything in this book. We'd be lucky if we learned even half of what this book says and we retained that. So we need to keep reading it and open our minds to new things, and not only reading it, but applying it to our daily lives, right? To putting that into our lives, putting that into our everyday, because that's when we'll truly be able to understand something and commit to something, is when we implement it into our lives and continuously do it. So let's keep going with part 7 of the conclusion. Spiritism presents 3 different aspects, namely spirit manifestation, the philosophical and moral principles deduced from these events, and the application of these principles. So here it's saying, clearly Spiritism can be broken up into 3 parts. The actual things that happen, right? Like they say here, the spirit manifestations, the actual things, the principles that we get from those things, like, oh, this happens, the moral and the philosophical reasonings that we can get because of we see something, and the application to those principles. So it's kind of like we see something happen, we realize why that happened to maybe one spirit or many spirits, and then we apply that to our lives. So saying, okay, if we don't want that to happen to us, we can do this instead, and then we'll progress and not have to go through that. So those are like the three different aspects they're saying. The thing that happens, what we're getting from that, right? And how we're applying that to our lives. And then they continue. Its adherents are divided into 3 classes or 3 degrees of advancement. First, there are those who believe in the authenticity of the spirit manifestation and validate them as an experimental science. Second, there are those who understand its moral bearings. Lastly, there are those who practice, or at least try to practice, its moral code. Regardless of the perspective, whether experimental, scientific, or moral, everyone perceives that they support an entirely different order of ideas, which must produce profound modifications in the state of humankind. Everyone also realizes that these modifications can only be for the good. So now they split up the types of the people, right? The people who are agreeing with Spiritism or following Spiritism, they're splitting them up into 3 people. There's those who are believing in the spirit manifestations, and they're validating them as science, right? As an experimental science. Then there's those who are looking more at the morals behind it, right? What are the moral lessons we can take from that? What can we learn from that? And then lastly, they said there's those who try to practice. So these kind of go with the 3 different aspects. So there's those who are just looking at the physical phenomena that are happening. Then there's those who look at the moral things, and then there are those who are applying those moral teachings to their daily lives, right? And we want to be those who apply it to our daily lives because we know that's going to help ourselves improve and get better. But one good thing is that, like they say here, regardless of which one you are, experimental, scientific, or moral, everyone is understanding that this is for the good, right? even if we're thinking it's really good for science to learn these things, or for moral code, we're all seeing this as a positive way that we are improving ourselves using Spiritism, right? And then the spirits continue. As for our adversaries, they may also be grouped into 3 categories. First, there are those who will automatically deny whatever is new or whatever they do not initiate, and who speak without knowing what they are talking about. Everyone who refuses to admit anything beyond the scope of their sense belongs to this group. They do not see anything they do not want to see. They do not see anything, do not want to see anything, and are even more unwilling to delve into anything. These individuals are in fact unwilling to see too clearly, for fear of being forced to admit that they are mistaken. For them, Spiritism is highly improbable, insane, utopian, and does not exist, period. They are willfully incredulous. In this group, we may also include those who have glanced at the subject merely to say, "I tried, but I was not able to find any merit here," and who do not seem to be aware that half an hour is not long enough time to learn a new field of science. So here they're saying that the people who are against Spiritism can also be split up into 3 categories. So there's people who automatically deny anything new. So if you tell them something new, but they're not the ones that came up with it, they're not the ones that discovered it first, they don't want to hear about it. They want nothing to do about it. So not only do they not want to see anything, so first they don't see anything, right? They can't believe it. Then they don't want to. Even if they see that you're valid, they force themselves not to. And also, they're unwilling to even try anything new or to see anything new. So they're too far, and then they dig themselves like a hole because they keep saying, no, 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 it's not true, it's not true. They keep being rude. And then they're too much in that hole to come out and say, oh yeah, you're right, I was wrong. They don't want to admit to their mistakes that they messed up and they were wrong and that wasn't true. So they just keep saying all these things and are unwilling to change the way they think or to look at the other side. And these people, they also will take a look at the Spirits book. Like maybe they'll skim it really quick and they'll say, yeah, there was nothing good in there, just to say that they did it. But we've been doing this for over 2 years now, and even we know that we don't understand everything. So imagine skimming it for half an hour. Of course it's not going to make sense. Of course it's not going to seem valid. Second, there are those who, although perfectly aware of the legitimacy of the phenomena, oppose it out of self-interest motives. They know that Spiritism is true, but they attack it because they fear its consequences. So the second group, they believe in these phenomena that are happening. They believe in Spiritism. They think it's true, but they're scared of the consequences because they say, okay, if this is true, then I'm going to suffer so many consequences for the wrong things that I've done. So because of that, they're afraid to fully come out and believe in Spiritism, so they attack it instead because while they believe it's true, they don't want it to be because that means they're going to suffer. And third, there are those who find the moral rules of Spiritism to be an extremely severe condemnation of their actions and habits. Seriously acknowledging Spiritism is an inconvenience they neither reject nor accept it, but prefer to close their eyes to it. The first class is swayed by pride and conjecture, the second class by ambition, and the third by selfishness. This position disappears over time. We should then seek a fourth class of antagonists who are based their antagonism on a careful and thorough examination, providing positive and irrefutable evidence of its falsehood. So here they're saying how the third class are the ones who find the rules to be too harsh. Again, they're scared that if this is true, then I'm going to be in a lot of trouble because of all these wrong things to do. So they're being selfish because they don't want to believe it and they don't want to spread it because they don't want that to be true for themselves. But the reality is that they're saying here that there should be a fourth class. There's no fourth class, but there should be a fourth class of people who are basing their criticism on real facts. Because if you have a criticism to say, if you have something you don't agree with, then you need to have the facts to back you up, right? It can't just be your opinion. There has to be irrefutable evidence, like they said, evidence that stands true, that it's false. And if that's true, then you have a valid argument, right? Then you can go against it. You can say something of the opposing side as long as you have that evidence behind you. But oftentimes they don't. They just close their eyes and shut out Spiritism. Then they continue. It is too much to expect of human nature that it can be changed suddenly by Spiritist ideas. Undoubtedly, the actions are not the same, or equally powerful in people who support these ideas. Nevertheless, the result, however slight it may be, is always beneficial, if only by proving the existence of an extracorporeal world, and disproving the opposing materialistic doctrines. So here they're saying, it's unrealistic to expect everyone to just change to Spiritism, right? We know that there's been so many religions, and it's hard for people to just switch what they believe in, what's been kind of drilled into them. It's hard for them to go away from that, for everyone to suddenly believe in all these ideas. But they're saying, if everyone gets even a slight little idea, right? If they start doing one little thing a little bit different, that will go a long way. If everyone changes one little thing about how they handle something, or if everyone does one nice thing more often, then that would make a big difference in the long run. And then they continue. Mere observations of Spiritist phenomena can yield the same results. However, it produces other effects in people who understand its philosophy and see something more than curious phenomena. The first and most common is the development of religious notion, even in those who are indifferent to spiritual things, and even if they are not materialistic. This sentiment leads to a disregard for death, not a desire for death, because a spiritist defends his or her life like anyone else's. It is an indifference that causes the person to accept death, when inevitable, the resignation, and without regret, as some would be welcomed rather than feared due to the belief in life after death. So here it's saying how Spiritism has its effect on people who might not call themselves Spiritists, but they start understanding the philosophy. They start seeing something interesting, something curious, right? So they might not even call themselves Spiritists, but they have this little thing in them. And they said the most common thing is this kind of religious notion that forms, because that's kind of what's engraved in us right now, because society is so caught up on religions, right? And being a certain religion, and you've grown up in that, so you're accustomed to that. So in this religious notion, they're saying that's the first thing that comes. Even if people aren't actually spiritual, or even if they're not materialistic, but this kind of religious notion comes to them, the first and most common thing, they said. And so they're saying that one of the main things that people, even non-Spiritism, get from that is to learn to not fear death, right? Because we know that there's more after. And so even when people don't admit that they're Spiritists, that's kind of an idea that sticks with them, because many people are scared to accept death, right? To accept dying. But to know there's more after that, kind of, like they're saying here, helps people accept it and not advance death, but welcome it when it's that time to come. Now they continue. The second effect is acceptance of the vicissitudes of life. Spiritism leads us to consider issues from such an elevated perspective that the significance of physical life lessens proportionally, and we are less painfully affected by its trials and tribulations. The consequence is that we have more courage when we face adversity, more moderation in our desires, and a more strongly rooted disgust for the idea of shortening our lives. Spiritism teaches us that suicide always results in the loss of what we hoped to attain. The certainty that there is a future life, that it correlates directly with our deeds, and the possibilities of meeting loved ones in the afterlife gives Spiritists solace. So here what they're saying is that Spiritism is helping us to look at life from a different point of view, right? Because when we're going through something, it may seem like the biggest obstacle ever. It may seem like a big task that we have to overcome, and it seems humongous that we'll never overcome that. But if we're looking at it from an elevated point of view, from a different perspective, from a spiritist perspective, we see that that's just a little bump in the road that we have to get over. And it gives us more courage and more confidence to overcome that, because we know it's just a little thing that we have to overcome, and that what we get out of that is going to be much better. And also, one of the great things that are learned is that suicide is not going towards what you want, right? And when people commit suicide, they believe they're going to escape everything that's happening, all the wrongdoings. But when we look at it from a spiritist point of view, we see that that's actually quite the opposite, right? Because now we could have kept going through our obstacles that we had, we could have kept trying, but instead, now we committed an even bigger mistake that now we're going to have to fix for that, and we're going to have to suffer for that on top of it. And then they continue. Likewise, a continual observance of life beyond the grave and understanding of what has been a mystery up until now amplifies one's horizons infinitely. The third effect is to encourage indulgence and understanding for the flaws of others. However, it must be admitted that selfishness is one of the most persistent human traits and more difficult to uproot than any other. We are willing to make sacrifices if they cost nothing, and provide us that they impose no deprivation. Money exercises an irresistible attraction, and very few understand the word luxury when it relates to themselves. Thus, the renunciation of the self is the most eminent sign of progress. So, here is saying the third effect that Spiritism has on people is that people learn to look out for others. They learn to understand others and understand that if I have all these faults, then that person has all their faults, and we're not to judge them or to make fun of them because we probably had those faults or will have those faults as well. So it's helping us to look over other people and help other people and be considerate towards other people. But we know that selfishness is one of the most persistent human traits, one of those that we are very stuck to, selfishness. So we are always thinking about ourselves, and even when we're doing good things, sometimes we're doing good things because it's easy for us, because it doesn't cost us anything. If I have extra clothes, okay, I'll give my extra clothes. But what about giving the clothes that aren't extra to someone else, right? Something that takes a little more work to do. So they're saying here, when you're actually making progress is when you have this renunciation of yourself, of when you're doing things that are selfless, right? Not being selfish, and helping others, even if you don't really have the means to help others, but you still do that. That's when there's real signs of progress. Section 8 of the conclusion. Some ask whether spirits teach us anything new in relation to morality, anything greater than what Christ taught. If the Spiritist moral code is nothing other than that of scriptures, does it serve any purpose? This method of reasoning is like that of Khalfar Omar in speaking of the Library of Alexandria. If, he said, it contains only what is found in the Quran, it is useless, and in that case it must be burned. If it contains anything that is not found in the Quran, it is bad, and in that case it must also be burned. So what they're saying here is that some people question, is Spiritism just Jesus' teachings and just another way? And they're saying if Spiritism was only based on something that the scriptures that we already have, then there would be no point, right? Because we already have those scriptures, so why would we need something else that's just the same thing of what we already have? And then they're saying there's also this reasoning, because people say if it's the same thing, then we don't need it because we already have that one. But if it's different, then we're going against that thing that we already have. So now we also see that as a bad thing. We also see it as a threat because it's going against what we already have. So, and then they gave us an example of that. And then the spirits continue. No, Spiritism does not preach a moral code that is different from that of Jesus's. In turn, haven't the laws of God already been given to Moses, to humanity before the time of Christ? Is the doctrine embodied by the Ten Commandments not the same as Christ's? Has it ever been proposed that Jesus' moral teachings are useless because of this? To those who deny the usefulness of Spiritism, we ask them the following question. Why is it that Christ's moral teachings are so rarely practiced? And why is it that those who rightly praise their values are the first to violate his paramount law of universal charity? So here what they're saying is, Spiritism teaches the moral code of Jesus, right? Jesus had that moral code, but if we think about it, that doesn't mean it's useless, because Moses also brought us those moral codes before Jesus. Moses brought those codes, those 10 commandments for us. And then Jesus came, and again, it was not going against Moses, but just adding to that and supplementing it. So, and has anyone ever questioned Jesus going against Moses, or was that necessary? So they're saying those who deny the usefulness of it, just because it's the same principles, doesn't mean that we don't need it re-explained, that we don't need a better explanation, because clearly, with just Jesus' teachings, we're not evolving to our full capability, right? We're not getting to where we should be. So clearly we need something else to help us understand. Then they continue. Not only do the spirits now confirm it, but they also show us in practical utility. They make clear and intelligible the truths that were previously taught as allegories, and alongside with the internal truths of morality, they also provide us with the solutions for the most abstract philosophical problems. So here they're saying that Spiritism is getting those same teachings that Jesus brought us, but before they were taught in allegories. They were taught in short stories that wasn't the bigger picture, right? It wasn't the full meaning. But now Spiritism is getting that and saying, okay, yeah, this was a little story, but here's the actual meaning behind that. So we needed that, because in the time, those people couldn't comprehend these elaborate stories, right? They needed these short stories. They needed these little allegories to apply to their lives so that they could understand. But now we've progressed a little bit, and we can start to comprehend the bigger picture of it. So it's coming with more clear-cut truths instead of these little stories, instead of these little allegories. And then it continues. Jesus came to show humanity the road to true goodness. Since God sent him to remind human beings of the divine laws they had forgotten, why should God not send spirits to remind them again? With greater precision, now they are forgetting it because they have sacrificed everything for pride and greed? Who would dare to take it upon oneself to limit God's power or to dictate divine ways? Who can say that the appointed time has not arrived, as declared by the spirits, when previously unknown or misunderstood truths must be openly made known to hasten humanity's advancement? Isn't there something evidently divine in the fact that spirit manifestations are occurring in every corner of the globe? It is not the case that a single person or prophet comes to enlighten us, but instead it is the case that light is breaking all around, and a new world is being unfurled right before our eyes. So here again we see that they're again talking how Moses brought the 10 Commandments for us. But then humanity started forgetting those. Humanity started leaving those behind, and even though they pretended to take note of them, they weren't practicing them. So then Jesus came to remind us of those things and to bring us a new way to think about it. So now we're forgetting again, right? People forget. People get so caught up in pride and selfishness that they forget again these laws. So Spiritism came again to help us to, in a clear-cut way, clear and precise, say, okay, this is still here, right? These laws, Jesus' laws, the 10 Commandments, they're still here and they're still valid. And to help us realize this so that we can advance humanity as a whole. So that's a good place for us to leave off today. And next week, hopefully, we'll finish the conclusion and then we'll move on to doing a new thing. But before we leave off today, I'd like to leave with our message from the Daily Book of Positive Quotations by Linda Picone for today's date, February 12th. Deciding to be happy. Most folks are about as happy as they make their minds to be. Abraham Lincoln. I'd be happy if only. There's always something we're waiting for. The right relationship, the right job, the right living situation. A child, a raise, a change of season to make us happy. When we look around, though, we see plenty of people who are happy even without anything we want. They simply decided to be happy now, rather than postponing their happiness for a time that may never come. Happiness is a state of mind, not a set of circumstances. I can and will choose to be happy today. If at all you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, anything you want to talk about at all, feel free to email me at kardecreative4teens@gmail.com and I'll get back to you right away. I'm Bia, and this has been Kardec Reader for Teens. Thank you all for listening. This has been Kardec Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening.